Hello, hello. I was missing because I quickly had to feed Daisy so she wouldn't be interrupting the program today. Um, so I am live on Facebook and also on Zoom. If anybody wants to come in here and ask questions, I'm probably going to go for about 15 minutes just for Q&A. And that is open to everybody in the Facebook group. One of the things that I wanted to touch on first was what I posted last night. If you were on the East Coast, I'm sure you were in bed already, but I was having a bit of an aha moment about the whole weight loss, falling off track, getting frustrated, not being able to do the things because, as you first embark on a new program, no matter what it is, you're always like totally gung-ho and you are all in, man. You're just going to do all the things. You're going to do it all right. And you do it for, could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months, could be 6 months. And then life kind of happens and you get thrown some curveballs and all of a sudden you stop doing the things that helped you get successful and you have a really difficult time getting yourself back on track. And I've got a couple clients that are dealing with that right now, had huge success, had a curveball, and are really struggling to try to do everything. And I think this is where we get into the whole black and white situation where, if we're not going to do everything perfect, then we can't do anything at all. And we continue to self-sabotage. And, what I wrote in there was sometimes we don't do the things, even though we know they work. Because it's either all black and white or just in that particular moment, the choices that we make matter more than the choice that we wish we would have made later on. So in essence, we're choosing to either think, well, crap, I can't do everything all right, so I'm not going to do anything, or I just want this thing and I want to do this thing that's going to give me instant gratification. And then hours down the road, or maybe even the next morning, you experience frustration after that choice. And that is such a vicious cycle. The one thing that is really, really important is to kind of notice how you feel after that frustration and the result of the things that you did that you probably shouldn't have done, but you did anyway for that instant gratification, and have it visible. So for any future upcoming event or potential to backslide, have it visible so that you kind of can look at that and say, well, crap, this is how I felt when I did the silly thing. And I really don't want to feel that way. Or you might choose to do the silly thing again. And if that's the case, then especially if you have been in so many different programs, Weight Watchers, South Beach, Atkins, whatever program that is involving weight loss, when you're all gung-ho and then you have great success and then you stop having success and you totally fall off the wagon and you're looking at yourself like, why can't I do this? There's some recurring pattern that you have and that you continue to have. And it's probably a pattern that you've had since childhood, or there may have been an occurrence that happened to you somewhere along the course of your life, if you're 50 years old or more, that you don't really think about right now, but deep-seated in your subconscious, deep-seated even in your mind is just the fact that this happened and you have a pattern because of it. So, it could be that your go-to was potato chips, or your go-to was ice cream when you were really emotionally stressed out, or if you were really sad, thinking specifically about a conversation I had with my daughter when she had a situation with a guy and she's like, I just bought myself a pint of ice cream and I'm going to wallow in my tears. That stuff is real. It happens. We can't expect ourselves to be so robotic that our emotions are never going to get involved. But can you, or do you have the ability to look back over the course of time and even chunk things out in like decades? If decades are too big, then maybe you chunk it out in every 5 years and think about like significant events that may have happened in your life and how you responded to that. So if you are an emotional eater when it comes to food, like what are some of the instances that this occurred in the past? And the biggest thing is in the future, understanding and knowing when you're starting to feel those emotions and when you're starting to repeat those patterns, being able to identify how you're feeling at that particular given time, writing that down, and then just as the situation may approach or you may experience it, what are some diversion tactics that you could possibly put into place so that you can interrupt that pattern? Most often patterns are things that have been going on for years. So if you just started a program and you've been successful for 2 months or 6 months, and thinking about like tracking your food, if you know that that's a big rock and that's going to help you get to your goal, but you just can't wrap your head around doing it at the moment, even though you were successful at doing that, it's because think about it, right? You've only been learning how to do that part of tracking for either 2 or 6 months. When your pattern, especially at our age, has been years and years and years of going through that, experiencing that, living through those emotions and kind of responding without even thought. You just do, you go through the motions. So I would just encourage you, if you are that person who is just floundering in getting yourself to motivate yourself enough to make these things happen, that, you know, maybe you just have to realize that you can't go all in right away and do all of the things, but what are the big rocks? So when you think about, I've heard this analogy many, many times, but when you are thinking about a jar, right? And you've got big rocks, you've got little rocks, and then everything else is filled with sand and your jar becomes full to the top. But what is holding up the most space? The rocks, right? The things that are falling through the cracks are the small things, the things that aren't taking up that much space. So when it comes to your health, what are the big rocks? Personally, I think about them as the pillars. So sleep, stress, nutrition, exercise, movement, and water. Those are my 6 big rocks. Probably the biggest rock of all is sleep, stress, and nutrition. And if you can just kind of focus on what you think your biggest hurdle is in the moment, you're going to have a greater chance of success focusing on 1 or 2 things that you're struggling with versus trying to wrap your head around doing all the things all the time for the rest of your life. It's just, I wish it were simple like that, but it's really not. And, you know, there's a, I'm just trying to get in here. I just lost my train of thought, where it was like going with that. Anyway, just to kind of recap, you know, when you are in a season where you are struggling to do the things that you know you are trying to do, even just thinking about, okay, what are those big rocks? What is going to push the needle to get myself closer to my goals and what I'm trying to accomplish? and not worrying about all the smaller rocks and the sand and having to get everything 100% right and complete. Because what tends to happen is those big rocks are going to have a higher impact. You're going to start to see your results happen, and then you're going to be more motivated in turn to continue to do the other things that are going to help you get to your goals. So that being said, that's kind of what I want to talk about today.
Just thinking about, okay, what are those big rocks?
Oh, somebody needs to mute. I'm going to jump on Facebook and just see if there are any questions that came up below my video. I'll hang on here for a couple of seconds and then I will jump off if no one comes on with any questions. Those of you who are out in Zoom land, if you have a question that you want to ask, go ahead and do so. I'll stay on Facebook for another 2 minutes. And then we'll start with our group call. And there's Daisy. Any questions? Q&A, Q&A. Does that make sense about the whole pattern thing? Those of you that are out here listening, you can type in the chat or type on Facebook. If you are watching on Facebook and you are catching the replay, just type in the comments that you are catching the replay so I can know who's watching live and who's not watching live. Carolyn, Denise, Kristen, any questions you want to share? Makes total sense. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I've dealt with a lot of rocks this last week, I think, just with stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just realized I go right for the food when I get stressed out, and I stress eat. Like, they had pizza in the office. I had said no. And then I went strolling past that box and I was like, well, F it. And I grabbed a piece of pizza and ate it.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. And again, I think that not happens a lot. It's a common occurrence for so many people to use food as a source of comfort. I mean, the whole comfort food thing is really true, and it's usually mostly carbohydrates and fatty foods that are sources of comfort. There is a legitimate physiological response that happens when you eat those kinds of foods where your serotonin levels increase, and it does make you happier for a brief moment. But then again, what tends to happen, especially if you are trying to pursue fat loss goals or weight loss goals, or even lifting goals or performance goals, when you tend to eat those types of comfort foods, you generally do not feel well afterwards, especially if it's not something that is commonly in your diet at the time, and it will make you feel sluggish. So if it's a performance thing, it will totally heed your performance, and it will heed your weight loss and fat loss goals. So, but I think that the biggest thing is, like I was just saying, if you know that you are an emotional eater, one of the things I will always suggest is, first of all, if you know that that is your MO, if you have those kind of foods that are laying around and it's a food that tempts you, I mean, definitely East Coast pizza would tempt me. How can you avoid the temptation? You could set a timer. You could make sure that you're eating before that food arrives so that you're definitely not hungry, because you're going to be way more likely to imbibe or partake in something like that if you know that it's, coming your way and it's lunchtime and you haven't eaten since 6 o'clock in the morning. You're already going to be hungry and your guard's going to be down to begin with, and then layer the stress into that, and you have like zero fighting chance as you're walking past the room and smelling the insane smells that pizza has. So, making sure that you're not hungry. So eating, if you know that that's going to arrive before the food gets there, so you're going to be less inclined to want to have it. And then steering yourself clear from the area. And then also, just giving yourself 5 minutes. And then, if you still want it, reevaluate. Okay, is this going to be worth it to me? Or, do I want to keep pushing towards my goals? And then if you make the choice that it's worth it, then you just have to make sure you're not beating yourself up or frustrated from making that choice, versus, going back and slamming a piece of pizza down, barely even tasting it, and you're hating yourself for doing it after the fact. So I think that's where the pattern comes into play. So recognizing it is half the battle. Anyway, any comments on that you guys want to make? All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the Facebook Live because it doesn't look like anybody has any questions. You guys stay put.